Adventures in Negro History.
We are the voices of the black man's past. We echo his feelings and his memories we hold fast.
Is that you, Grandpa?
Yes, it's Grandpa.
We're in the dining room, Grandpa.
My goodness, you sure look busy. What's going on, Carol?
John and I are looking at some college catalogs I've got to pick out a college for next September.
It's kind of hard to believe. It seems like just yesterday that you were getting ready for high school.
Grandpa, Carol has catalogs from Howard, Fisk, University of Michigan, Talladega, and Hampton.
Well, I'm very happy for you, Carol. And I know that you will make us all proud.
Grandpa, did you go to college?
No, son, I didn't have much regular schooling. I just went to the College of Hard Knocks. I was lucky. Things turned out pretty good for us.
What do you mean, Grandpa?
It's a long story. It's not just my story. It belongs to all of the black people in this country who've tried to get an education.
Grandpa, I remember you told me a lot about it a long time ago. Won't you please tell John some of the things you told me? He hasn't learned about it in school yet.
John, the black people's struggle for decent opportunity in this country is tied up so tightly with education until you can't separate them. It all started when we were brought here as slaves from Africa.
We were snatched from our native land,
Herded like cattle onto the stifling slave ships.
Tossed rudely onto the shores of the New World.
We who spoke Igbo, Hausa, and Efik were forced to learn our master's native tongue.
our tribal customs that we had followed for centuries were outlawed. The order of the day was to follow the whims of our master, learn and speak only his language,
Worship only his God.
Imitate only his culture. Learn what he wanted us to learn. This was the curriculum of the black man's first school in America.
During the early days of slavery in America, Negroes were educated or trained for whatever work their master wanted done. Slaves were taught to work in the fields, look after livestock, cook and act as servants, and serve aboard ship. Some were skilled craftsmen. In fact, they brought many of these skills with them. There was no school for them, but many did learn on their own to read and write. Some of these slaves escaped. There are newspapers still on file to prove this.
The American Weekly Mercury, July 11, 1723. Ran away from Chester County a Negro man named William, aged about 30 years. He speaks very good English and reads and writes. A reward is offered to anyone who can return him.
The Pennsylvania Gazette, September 11, 1740. Ran away from East New Jersey a Negro man named Simon, a well-set fellow around the age of 40. Reads, writes, speaks good English, can bleed and draw teeth. A reward of £3 is offered to anyone who can find this man.
The New York Gazette, July 18, 1748. Ran away from his master, a Negro manservant called Robin, about 28 years old. Can read and write and plays a fiddle. A reward of £10 and all reasonable charges will be paid for his return to the custody of...
Grandpa, when did black people start going to school in America?
Weren't our first schools started by the churches?
That's right. For example, one religious man named Elias New founded a school in New York City back in 1704.
Elias New taught slaves how to read and write along with their 10 Commandments and other religious studies. The slaves were eager to learn, but in 1712 there was a slave revolt in New York City, and many masters blamed New for it, saying that a slave who learns to read and write will become unhappy being a slave. But the royal governor made it possible for Mr. New's school to continue, and the slaves from New's school would take it upon themselves to teach other slaves.
Grandpa, why did the churches try to teach the slaves?
Our country was set up partly for religious reasons. The Puritans believed you had to be able to read God's law, or else you would fall. You would fall from grace. Many masters in the colonies did not mind giving their slaves religious training, especially after the Bishop of London, England, said that Christianity did not make a slave free. Of course, many masters claimed that Negroes just couldn't learn. But a Quaker schoolmaster in Philadelphia, named Anthony Benezet, argued that they could learn. Here's what he said.
I am bold to assert that the notion entertained by some that the blacks are inferior in their capacities is a vulgar prejudice, founded on the pride or ignorance of their lordly masters, who have kept their slaves at such a distance as to be unable to form a right judgment of them.
Back in 1770, there were slaves and freemen who were writers, such as Jupiter Hayman, one of America's first black poets, and Phyllis Wheatley, the poetess who glorified General George Washington. There was even a Negro doctor named James Durham.
During the Revolutionary War, the battlefield was my classroom. My master was a surgeon in the British Army. And I, James Durham, assisted him in his medical duties, and he taught me much about the art of healing. As a boy, I had been taught to compound medicines. And after the war, I was sold to another doctor in New Orleans. And I eventually earned enough money to buy my freedom. Within several years, I had a thriving medical practice in New Orleans. My patients were both white and black.
On April 19th, 1775, when citizen soldiers at Lexington and Concord fired the shot heard round the world,
Black men were there.
They heard the cries for freedom ring the air.
They believed that through gallant deeds they could be free.
A few found semi-freedom.
but the majority of their brethren did not. Freedom and its blessings passed them by.
Prince Hall, a free Negro, veteran of the Revolutionary War and founder of the Negro Masonic Order, reminded the young nation of its debts to black people. In 1788, he spoke out for equal educational opportunities for the black children of Boston.
To the Honorable Senate and House of Representatives of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we, your petitioners, black and free men of this Commonwealth, do beseech that our children should also enjoy the privileges of free men and be able to attend the free school in the town of Boston. We have not been backward in the payment of our taxes. Therefore, we pray that our offsprings in this land of gospel light be able to enjoy its benefits, which they are denied now for no other reason than that they are black.
But the government of Massachusetts offered black children only segregated classrooms. Many black parents refused to have their children thus set aside. Prince Hall then established a school for colored children in his own home. And Paul Cuffey, America's first black sea captain and capitalist, built a school on his farm in Westport, Massachusetts around 1797 so that all of the children in the district would have a free school to attend. Cuffey was vitally interested in education, both in the United States and in Africa. He helped find teachers to teach in Sierra Leone, and he paid part of their salaries.
Grandpa, were there any Afro-American organizations that tried to help during this time?
Yes, Carol. According to some of the books that I've read, there were the Free African Societies. These mutual aid societies were located in Boston, New York City, and Philadelphia. The one in Philadelphia was founded in 1787. It was one of the earliest and most effective organizations of its kind. Its main purpose was to improve the condition of free Negroes in Philadelphia and to aid them in any way possible. Two of the guiding lights of this movement were Reverend Richard Allen and Reverend Absalom Jones.
Reverend Jones, our society is making some important contributions to our people in Philadelphia. We've been able to find colored teachers for the schools at both of our churches.
You're right, Reverend Allen. We are making progress. But it's not enough. We must work even harder. We must secure enough money to continue to educate the children of our deceased members and to see that they get apprenticed to suitable trades. Our children must be educated.
And then there were black organizations like the Augustine Society, a group of black people who banded together to establish a school for young Negroes in Philadelphia around 1818. For training craftsmen and for general education, there was a similar society in New York City around 1827 called the African Society for Mutual Relief. Its president, William Hamilton, urged black youths to seek meaningful education.
Now that slavery has finally been abolished in New York State, the time has come for black people to take advantage of their opportunities. In order to do this, you must improve your minds and study science, and above all, be sure to measure your accomplishments by the same standards as white people.
Grandpa, weren't there abolitionist societies doing something about education too?
Yes, there were, but they were not called abolitionist societies at this point in time. They were called manumission societies, and societies for improvement of the free blacks.
What's a manumission society?
They were organizations that worked for Negro freedom. The group in Pennsylvania was called the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery, the relief of free Negroes unlawfully held in bondage, and improving the general condition of the African race.
Wow!
That's a long title, but it certainly tells what they were trying to do.
Benjamin Franklin was the first president of that long-named Philadelphia organization. There were manumission societies in most of the states north of Maryland. The New York City Society was able to get the city and the state to finance the New York City Free African Schools. Each society did quite a bit to help educate free Negroes. Most of them were founded just after the Revolutionary War. There were other white humanitarians who set up schools for black people in Washington, Baltimore, Alexandria, Richmond, Norfolk, Nashville, and Knoxville. But back in the 1820s, things weren't going this way all over. In the South, there were laws that prohibited teaching slaves to read and write. Free Negroes could learn to read and write, but not slaves.
Even in some northern states, children, like Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana, state laws prohibited Negro children from attending school.
Not even if they paid taxes?
That's right. You see, John, the education of Negro children has always required a determined effort on our own part. For most of our history, it has been the black man's burden. For instance, in the free African schools of New York City, most of the teachers were black. During the 1830s, the schools were helped tremendously by two groups of black people, the Dorcas and the Phoenix Societies. The women of the Dorcas Society made clothing for the poorer children to wear to school, and the Phoenix Society members served as attendance agents and social workers.
Wow, that was real community involvement.
Washington, D.C. is another example.
In 1807, three former slaves, George Bell, Nicholas Franklin, and Moses Liverpool, bought some land and built the first school for Negroes in Washington. Although they themselves could not read or write, they did appreciate the value of an education. Two other black men, Henry Smothers and John Prout, established Columbia Institute around 1823. And during the 1830s, John F. Cook and Louisa Park Costin operated schools in Washington. There was the Colored Female Roman Catholic Beneficial Society that was founded in 1828. It played an important part. And there was Maria Beecraft.
My name is Maria Beecraft. In 1820, at the age of 15, I opened a girls' school for members of my race on Dumbarton Street in Washington, D.C. I watched many a young girl grow from an awkward duckling into a graceful swan. In August of 1831, I turned my school over to one of my former students, and I moved on to other service. I joined the Order of the Sisters of Providence in Baltimore, which was a teaching order of black nuns.
Yes?
Are you John Chavis, the schoolmaster?
Yes, I am. Won't you come in?
Thank you. I wish to place my son in a good school, but how can I be sure that you will educate him properly? What are your qualifications?
Sir, I am a free citizen of Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was a soldier of the Revolution. I attended Princeton and Washington Academy. I am an ordained Presbyterian minister. I have a sound knowledge of Greek and Latin. No one can teach your son the English language as well as I can. I learned mine from the Lindley Murray Speller, and it is superior to the English grammar taught in this part of the country. A number of my students have become famous. One is a congressman. You may be sure that your son will get as good an education as he is capable of getting.
John Chavis had received his education in a most unusual manner. It seems as though one white man bet another that a Negro was incapable of getting a college education. So John Chavis was sent to college, and he completed the course, and he became quite famous. He taught the sons of planters during the day for $2.50 per semester, and the sons of free Negroes at night for $1.75. But after the Nat Turner Rebellion in 1831, he had to close his school to black students.
The Nat Turner Rebellion. The Nat Turner Rebellion. The Nat Turner Rebellion.
The Nat Turner Rebellion of August 1831 lasted only 40 hours, but it sent shock waves up the nation's spine.
People north and south were propelled into action by blind and unreasoning fear.
Most states in the South passed stronger laws that prohibited all Negroes from learning, teaching, and preaching.
In the North, a plan by Samuel Cornish, a black minister, to build a college offering manual training and classical education was voted down by the citizens of New Haven, Connecticut.
And then there was Prudence Crandall, a young white teacher dedicated to educating Negro girls.
Young ladies, please open your books to page 151. Oh, dear, there's someone at the door. Please read silently until I return.
There she is! Miss Crandall!
Yes?
We represent the folks of Canterbury. We don't want your school here.
My dear sir, this is only a school for young colored ladies. We mean no harm to anyone. What possible harm could we do?
We're not here to argue. You've got to close this school and send those people back where they belong.
That's right.
You sirs are no gentlemen. I refuse to continue this conversation. Good day.
Get away!
Prudence Crandall fought valiantly, but she could not win. Stores refused to sell her supplies. The doctor refused to treat her students. Her students were insulted on the streets. She was even put in jail. Finally, she left the state of Connecticut.
Wasn't there something like this in Canaan, New Hampshire?
Yes, the Noyes Academy in Canaan, New Hampshire accepted several black students. But fearing all kinds of imaginary evils, the good people of Canaan dragged the school building into a swamp with a team of 100 oxen.
Boy, our folks have certainly had a lot of obstacles in getting an education.
Well, children, you've heard that where there's a will, there's a way. So during the time of slavery, all over the South, secret schools called ebony schools and loft schools were in operation. And some masters secretly taught some of their slaves. The story of a slave called Stephen is a good example.
Have you thought about what I asked you last week, Master?
Yes, Stephen, I have, and I've decided to get you a speller and teach you how to read and write. But you mustn't tell a soul what we're doing. You know what'll happen if someone catches you with that book.
I'll be careful, and I'll keep my mouth shut.
Stephen did learn to read and write, and he began to teach others. He only taught those slaves he could trust. They would meet in the carriage house, the stable loft, or any other secluded place they could find. Classes were held between 10 o'clock at night and 2 o'clock in the morning.
All right. right, everybody. Watch your step. Don't make a sound. Now, today's lesson is how to spell words that sound the same. Listen to me. C-A-T spells cat. H-A-T spells hat. F-A-T spells fat. All right, let's spell them together. Whisper, not too loud.
C-A-T spells cat. H-A-T spells hat. F-A-T spells fat.
Very good. Now, everybody, let's try something else.
Stephen Walter Rogers taught many lessons that way down in New Orleans. Meanwhile, black people in the North were constantly petitioning the state legislatures to secure equal educational opportunities and facilities. In Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, black codes maintained school segregation. And in other northern states, even though the state constitutions did not support school segregation, individual city councils and school committees usually did. This struggle continued until after the war between the states. And in 1849, Frederick Douglass raised his majestic voice against the educational inequalities in his own town of Rochester, New York.
The colored citizens of this city pay as freely for the support of schools as any other class. And their children are as much entitled to school privileges as are the sons of the wealthiest of this community. And there can be no sound reason founded in justice why they should be shut out of the fine, airy schoolhouses of the districts and driven into the dull, damp, dark, and badly ventilated cellar of Zion Church. It is a disgrace to the city of Rochester that such an act of flagrant injustice and cruelty can be perpetrated against any class of its citizens.
A black family in Boston, the Roberts family, sued the Boston School Committee for equal school rights back in the 1850s. Benjamin Roberts sued the city of Boston on behalf of his daughter Sarah. He attempted to close the segregated Smith High School and other segregated schools. Roberts was helped by a sizable number of black Bostonians. Charles Sumner, a white man, was their attorney. Later, Sumner was elected to the United States Senate, where he championed Negro rights. The Roberts case went all the way to the Massachusetts Supreme Court, which ruled in favor of the Roberts family. Sumner helped to establish the principle that segregated schools were incapable of offering equal educational opportunities. In 1855, separate schools were abolished in Boston.
Grandpa, weren't schools set up in Canada for runaway slaves?
Yes, Carol. The Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 forced many black people to flee to Canada. Canada was the freest place in North America for Negroes. Mary Shadd Cary, a free black school teacher from Washington, D.C., established a school at one of the Canadian communities for refugees. Also, there was Josiah Henson. He helped to build schools in the settlement near Windsor, Canada. He established a school for old and young students.
The 1850s ran their course.
The 1860s burst upon the scene. America went to war in order to solve by fire and sword what her politicians could not solve through reason.
In this bitter struggle, the freedom of black men became an important issue.
This became a time of testing.
Testing whether this nation or any nation can long endure, half slave, half free.
Early in the Civil War, the Union forces captured Fortress Monroe at Hampton, Virginia, and a group of islands off the coast of South Carolina. The government and a number of civilian volunteers embarked upon a noble experiment of educating slaves to become productive citizens. This could have become a pattern for the Reconstruction period. Mary Peaks at Fortress Monroe and Charlotte Fortin in South Carolina, two Afro-American teachers, were among the first volunteers. Miss Fortin's thoughts and feelings about this great adventure are recorded in her journal.
I've never seen children so eager to learn. Coming to school is a constant delight and recreation to them. They come here as other children go to play. The older ones, during the summer, work in the fields from early morning until 11 or 12 o'clock, and then come to school. After their hard toil in the hot sun, as bright and as anxious to learn as ever. Of course, there are slow ones. but these are in the minority. The majority learn with wonderful rapidity. Many of the grown people are also desirous of learning to read. It is wonderful how a people who have been so long crushed to the earth can have so great a desire for knowledge and such a capacity for attaining it.
In other parts of the war-ravaged South, the Union government did not know what to do with the slaves, sometimes called black contraband. Union Army chaplains were given the task of providing for their health, education, and welfare. Henry Minton Turner was one of the Negro chaplains who helped to meet this challenge. The Union Army was also helped by private organizations such as the Freedmen's Aid Societies and various church associations. A number of black men such as John Langston, Hiram Revels, and Francis Cardoza went south to help their fellow men. Some of them later became elected officials of various southern states. And during the Civil War, the black soldiers were not only very brave, but they also helped each other to learn to read and write. And in the Freedmen's Bureau, established by Congress in March of 1865, many black people worked as paid agents and volunteers, including Langston and Cardoza, and newcomers like Fanny Jackson and Louise DeMorty, both of whom had been educated at Oberlin College. Educating the freedmen was one of the Bureau's major purposes, but it also helped freedmen to find jobs and to receive fair labor contracts and fair treatment under the law. The Bureau cooperated with the American Missionary Society and with various other educational groups. The missionaries supplied the teachers and paid their salaries. There were also Freedmen's Aid Societies, who together with the missionary societies raised some $6 million to educate freedmen. Blacks themselves contributed substantially.
Grandfather, tell John about the Negro colleges.
A number of Negro colleges began a century ago, but they didn't start off with giant steps. They began with their students where they were and tried to teach them as much as they could. Many of these students went out and taught others. Right after the Civil War, almost 20 colleges and universities were established within a 5-year period. Many of these are still in existence, such as Virginia Union, Shaw, Fisk, Lincoln, Talladega, Morehouse, Howard, Hampton, Johnson C. Smith, Philander Smith, Atlanta University, Clark, Dillard, Bowie State, Morgan, Rusk, Tougaloo, St. Augustine, and Claflin.
Of course, some of these schools, like Dillard and Morgan, were organized under different names than they bear today. Moreover, 2 schools that are still in existence, Wilberforce in Ohio and Lincoln in Pennsylvania, were actually founded before the Civil War in the 1850s. In the years immediately following the Civil War, the most important black men were congressmen and other elected officials in the South. However, in the important field of education, a number of black men served as teachers and administrators for various school systems. One of the most outstanding was Pennsylvania-born Jonathan C. Gibbs, who became superintendent of public instruction of the state of Florida from 1872 through 1874, and who drafted the Basic Act providing for Florida's public school system.
Some people call the Reconstruction years the Negro's finest hour.
Little did they know that the hour was late, and that darkness would once more come over the land.
And bands of night riders would defy the law and bring death and terror to the freedman, and once more restrain his liberty.
Old leaders such as Frederick Douglass would pass from the scene, and new leaders such as Booker T. Washington, founder of Tuskegee Institute, would emerge.
In 1895, Washington, speaking before the Southern Exposition at Atlanta, said that in things economic, Negroes and whites could be as a closed fist, but in all things social, black and white people could be as separate as the fingers of the hand.
And in 1896, separate but equal would become the law of the land. Down in New Orleans, Homer Plessy, a quadroon, had been arrested because he would not ride in the railroad car for Negroes. His case, Plessy versus Ferguson, was taken all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court ruled in 1896 that separation of the races was not unlawful.
Meanwhile, in 1895, Massachusetts-born W.E.B. Du Bois was earning his Ph.D. degree from Harvard University. He gathered around himself a small group of college-trained professionals and intellectuals who were opposed to the separate but equal doctrine. In their drive towards equality, this group formed the Niagara Movement, forerunner of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
By 1900, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois had become recognized as the leading spokesmen for black Americans. Washington, on the one hand, stressed industrial education as the surest path for Afro-Americans. He summed up his ideas this way.
I would set no limits to the attainments of the Negro in arts, in letters, or statesmanship, but I believe the surest way to reach those ends is by laying the foundation in the little things of life that lie immediately about one's door. I plead for industrial education and development for the Negro, not because I want to cramp him, but because I want to free him. I want to see him enter the all-powerful business and commercial world.
Booker T. Washington has often been criticized for his social and educational views. But if we look at him in terms of when and where he lived, we must admit he did make a tremendous contribution. In 1881, he took some land, a little money, and a lot of willpower, and developed a school that educated many Negroes. W.E.B. Du Bois, on the other hand, believed that industrial education was not enough. He believed that education had to strengthen the Negro's character, increase his knowledge, and teach him to earn a living.
Education is that whole system of human training, within and without the schoolhouse walls, which molds and develops men. If then we start out to train an unskilled people, our system must set for itself two great aims. One, dealing with knowledge and character, and the other, seeking to give the child the technical knowledge necessary for him to earn a living under present circumstances. But there must be those trained to teach in these schools, men and women of knowledge and culture and technical skill, who understand modern civilization and have the training and aptitude to impart it to the children under them.
Between 1896 and 1954, education for Negroes was separate but unequal all over America. School boundaries were drawn to exclude black people, and much less money was spent on their education. Georgia, in 1908, spent 99 cents to educate each black child, and $6.80 to educate each white child. In 1915, the state of South Carolina spent $16.22 to educate each white child, and $1.93 to educate each black child. In 4 southern states, the annual salary for white teachers was around $287, and for Negroes, $128.83. And until the 1954 Supreme Court decision, there were still segregated schools in many northern states. In the early 1900s, black parents in Alton, Illinois, Dayton, Ohio, East Orange, New Jersey, and other cities used sit-ins, boycotts, and court cases to desegregate their school systems. And for a long while, many northern school systems did not hire Negro teachers. Meanwhile, by 1933, there were nearly 40,000 black students enrolled in colleges. Most of them attended predominantly Negro colleges. Some attended northern schools, but even here they had difficulty securing admission to graduate, law, medical, and dental schools. In the South, they couldn't go, period. The majority of black dentists and physicians were trained at either Howard or Meharry, both black schools.
How did black students finally get into Southern white colleges?
Court cases, and decision after decision. The United States Supreme Court struck down admission barriers. And it was the NAACP and its tireless lawyers that deserve most of the credit. They spent untold hours and years preparing the cases that led to important decisions. Cases were fought in the courts from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, up to that special day of May 17th, 1954.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. The United States Supreme Court is now in session.
we conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal.
But grandfather, unequal education for black people in this country still continues.
Yes, Carol, you're right. Today we are still striving for equal opportunities in education.
Grandpa, you always say that we are the 14th generation Americans. When will we be free?
That's a good question, John. We've come a long way, but we've got to keep moving on for the sake of ourselves, our people, and all Americans. That's why you and Carol must get a good education.
Yes, the black man's quest for education has been a vital element in the never-ending struggle towards his full citizenship. The quest has persisted during and after his years of slavery, amidst trials and triumphs, opportunity and opposition. Many steadfast or somewhat fortunate black men and women have managed to find the light, and they in turn have shared it with their black brothers. Many valiant white people have also played their part. As the nation entered the last half of the 20th century, her highest court decreed that racial segregation in public education is unconstitutional. The quest became intensified. So also did the opposition. As the final quarter of the century approaches, the tide is turning. The prospect of equitable opportunity for black Americans finally looms bright on the distant horizon. The quest goes forward.